The year was 1903. From the endless white silence of Siberia, a lone figure trudged across the frozen steppes, his tattered boots sinking into snow that had swallowed entire villages. His beard was wild, his clothes reeked of earth and sweat, and yet his piercing eyes burned with a light that seemed unnatural against the bleak horizon. This man was Grigori Rasputin, unknown to the world, but soon to be whispered about in palaces and taverns alike as something more than mortal. When Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg, the capital buzzed with talk of his strange presence. He carried no possessions, no wealth, no rank, only an unsettling charisma. Priests found themselves uneasy in his company, as though his prayers twisted into incantations. Aristocrats who brushed against him spoke of a chill running through their bones, as if they had touched not a man, but something cloaked in shadows. In Camelot salons, gossip spread faster than fire. Was he a prophet? A fraud? Or had Siberia delivered something darker to the heart of Russia? Some claimed he could see into men's souls, reducing generals and noblemen to trembling confessions with nothing more than a stare. Others swore he cured peasants with a touch, whispering words no priest recognized. And yet, amid the suspicion, there was fascination. He was invited into drawing rooms, then churches, then the outskirts of the royal court itself. Each door that opened seemed less a gesture of welcome and more like a summoning. Still, for every admirer, there was a skeptic who swore his eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like embers waiting to ignite. Rasputin had come from the wilderness not as a pilgrim, nor as a beggar, but as an omen. And though no one yet dared say it aloud, the question hung in the air like smoke. What truly walked among them that night? The man called Rasputin, or something wearing his skin? The healer of princes. The winter palace was thick with silence the night that Tsarevich bled. Servants rushed through endless marble corridors, their footsteps muffled, their eyes fixed on the floor. Behind gilded doors, the imperial heir, fragile, pale Alexei Romanov, lay writhing in pain. The boy's hemophilia had once again turned a minor bruise into a battle with death. Doctors hovered, powerless, their whispered Latin words failing to calm the frantic sobs of Empress Alexandra. It was then, in that chamber of despair, that the name was spoken, Rasputin. He arrived without ceremony. His boots left stains of melted snow on the palace carpet. His robe carried the scent of sweat and incense. The courtiers recoiled, disgusted by his unwashed hair, his piercing stare, his air of intrusion into a sanctified space. But Alexandra clutched his hand as though it were the last anchor to her drowning world. Rasputin said little. He brushed aside the doctors, knelt beside the trembling boy, and placed a hand upon Alexei's chest. His lips moved in a murmur, but the words were not the prayers of the Orthodox Church, at least, not as the priests knew them. It was a strange, guttural chant, something half-whispered, half-sung, like wind curling through a graveyard. The boy's breathing slowed. His cries softened. The fever broke, and by dawn, Alexei was sitting upright, pale but alive, smiling faintly at the man who had entered the palace like a vagabond and now stood in the center of its power. The empress fell to her knees in gratitude, convinced heaven itself had answered her prayers. Yet the doctors whispered behind closed doors. What manner of healing was this? Was it medicine, or something unnatural flowing through his touch? From that day forward, Rasputin was no longer merely a curiosity from Siberia. He was the guardian of the empire's most precious life. And as he left the palace that morning, servants swore they saw him pause in the courtyard, tilting his head back as if listening to some voice only he could hear, smiling, as though it had answered. The seduction of the court. By spring, the whispers of Rasputin's miracle in the palace had spread beyond gilded walls and into every drawing room in St. Petersburg. The nobility, curious and uneasy, invited the so-called holy man into their salons, if only to glimpse the stare that had calmed the heir to the throne. What began as curiosity soon turned into something far more dangerous. Rasputin did not speak like a priest. His words were raw, unpolished, laced with riddles that seemed both blasphemous and profound. He told the noble women that sin was the road to salvation, that only by falling could one rise again. They laughed at his crudeness at first, yet later, alone in their chambers, they found themselves haunted by his voice. He would sit among them in candlelight, eyes half closed, swaying as if listening to invisible currents. The air grew heavy, charged, until those gathered felt as if the room itself leaned toward him. A duchess confessed secrets she had never told her husband. A general's wife placed her trembling hand in his, and later swore she felt her very heartbeat change its rhythm to match his. Men distrusted him, but even they could not escape the pull. Some left his company enraged, others confused, but all carried away a sense of unease, like they had looked too long into a mirror that showed not their face, but their soul stripped bare. And then came the incident at the Yusupov ball. Rasputin appeared without invitation, striding across the marble floor in his peasant boots. Music faltered. Eyes followed him as he approached a countess once rumored to have mocked him. They locked eyes, and she froze. Witnesses swore her pupils widened, her lips parted in silent terror. Later, she would whisper that in that instant she saw not a man, but a flicker of fire burning deep within his gaze, something primal and inhuman. From that night forward, even those who despised him could not deny his power. Some called it hypnosis, others hysteria. But behind the velvet curtains of Russia's elite, one truth spread like a contagion. Rasputin had enchanted the court. And once under his spell, few ever escaped. The first death plot. The whispers had grown too loud. Some called him a prophet, others a devil. But to the powerful men of St. Petersburg, Rasputin was a disease infecting the veins of the empire. Ministers muttered in private that the Tsarina's blind devotion to him made her reckless. Nobles seethed as their wives and daughters fell under his spell. And the priests? They feared that his teachings, his twisted gospel of sin and salvation, were heresy clothed in silk. So a circle of conspirators gathered in secret, men whose smiles in public concealed the iron of desperation. Their plan was simple. Invite Rasputin to a grand dinner, flatter him, toast him, and feed him cakes laced with enough cyanide to kill a dozen men. The night came. Rasputin entered the glittering dining hall like a wolf among foxes. Chandeliers blazed above, crystal glasses clinked, and laughter rang hollow. The conspirators watched with forced smiles as he devoured pastries and drained his goblet of poisoned wine. They waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. His face flushed, but his breathing never faltered. His eyes gleamed brighter with every bite, as if he were feasting not on food, but on their fear. One conspirator swore he saw Rasputin lick the rim of his glass, whispering something under his breath, almost as though mocking the poison itself. Finally, he pushed back his chair, stood, and let out a low, rasping laugh. "You men," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber, "you do not know what you serve at your tables. But I do." The room fell into stunned silence. His gaze swept over them, lingering long enough on each face that several looked away. Then, without another word, Rasputin left, his boots striking the marble floor like drums of war. When the conspirators rushed to inspect the cakes, they found the pastries untouched by decay, as though the poison had been consumed and somehow devoured, instead of resisted. Behind their trembling hands and shaken hearts, a dreadful question took root. Had they tried to kill a man that night? Or had they unknowingly fed something that thrived on death itself? The bullets and the beast. The conspirators were determined to finish what the poison had failed to do. That night, under a shroud of fog and secrecy, they lured Rasputin to the Yusupov palace once more. The ornate halls were silent, save for the crackling of a single hearth, casting flickering shadows that seemed alive, twisting along the walls like restless spirits. Rasputin entered unarmed, unafraid, as if he had known this night would come. His eyes, burning with the same unnatural intensity the Countess had once seen, scanned the room. He offered no greeting, no acknowledgement of the men who had sworn his death. Bullets rang out in the cold air. Rasputin stumbled, a dark stain blooming across his chest, yet his hand remained steady. The conspirators fired again, point-blank, deliberate. The sound of the musket shots echoed through the palace like the drumbeat of judgment. He fell, lifeless, for a heartbeat, and then rose. A low growl, human yet somehow otherworldly, escaped his lips. He advanced through the fog of smoke, each step slow and deliberate, as though the bullets had been nothing more than rain on stone. The men recoiled in horror, their hands trembling on triggers and blades alike. Rasputin bled, yes, but his eyes glimmered with a fire no wound could extinguish. They tried to strike again, but each attack seemed to miss its mark, each blow deflected by some unseen force. Panic replaced courage. The air grew thick with fear, the room oppressive, heavy with the knowledge that they were no longer dealing with a man. They had awoken something else entirely. When Rasputin finally spoke, his voice was low, rasping, and somehow echoing with multiple tones at once, as if several voices had found refuge in one body. Do you truly believe a man can be ended so easily? You mistake my flesh for the limit of me. By the time the assassins fled into the night, shaken to their cores, one truth was undeniable. Rasputin had survived what should have been certain death. And as he disappeared into the shadows of the city, the question gnawed at them all. Had they killed the man, or merely unleashed the beast? The river that wouldn't take him. The Neva was a frozen, merciless beast that night, its icy surface reflecting the pale moonlight like a slab of glass. Rasputin's captors, certain that their final act would succeed where bullets and poison had failed, dragged his bound form across the snow, muttering prayers and curses in equal measure. Their boots crunched against the ice, each step echoing like a death knell. They threw him into a carved hole, jagged edges biting at his limbs. The water was a black void beneath the ice, swallowing the faint reflection of the stars above. A few moments of silence passed, the kind that presses into a man's chest, making each heartbeat feel like a drum counting down to doom. Then, nothing. No splash, no sign of struggle, no body sinking into the frozen depths. Only the ice, unbroken except for the gaping hole, staring back at them like a mocking eye. Panic flared in the hearts of his would-be killers. One conspirator, trembling so violently he could barely speak, whispered, He cannot be dead." Hours later, when they returned to the river with torches and nets, the hole had frozen over again. Not a trace remained. No body, no blood, no hint of struggle. Locals swore that for days afterward, fishermen glimpsed a figure moving beneath the ice, pale and long-haired, watching them with eyes that burned like fire. The city buzzed with rumors. Had Rasputin somehow survived, rising from the icy grip of death itself? Or had his corpse been stolen, spirited away by unseen hands? Some even whispered that the river, sacred and cursed in equal measure, had refused to take him. By dawn, the conspirators were left with nothing but the knowledge that they had failed, and that the man they had tried to kill had vanished in a way that no logic could explain. Fear settled over them like a shroud, and one thought haunted each mind. Perhaps he was never meant to die. The secret society's obsession. Years had passed since the night Rasputin vanished beneath the Neva. The Russian Empire teetered on the edge of ruin, and whispers of revolution filled the streets of Petrograd. Yet in the shadows of crumbling palaces and smoke-filled study rooms, a different kind of obsession was growing. One that transcended politics. One that thirsted for the impossible, Rasputin's blood. A clandestine group, composed of exiled nobles, disillusioned priests, and occultists hungry for power, scoured the empire for any trace of the mad monk. They believed that his seeming immortality was no accident, that his miraculous survival held secrets that could grant eternal life or unimaginable power. Ancient texts were consulted, obscure rituals deciphered, and maps of Siberia's frozen wastes were traced again and again in hope of uncovering the origins of his pact. They experimented in hidden laboratories, blending alchemy with crude medicine, using stolen relics and even human subjects in their twisted quest. But the closer they drew to Rasputin's secret, the more their lives unraveled. Test subjects died in horrid, unexplainable ways. Blood turned to black sludge in their veins. Shadows seemed to linger longer than natural, and the air in the labs carried whispers of unseen entities. Despite failure, obsession only deepened. Letters between members hint at their growing desperation. "He walks still," one wrote. "His blood refuses to die. I have seen the sample pulse of its own accord," as if mocking the laws of nature. In the drawing rooms of the city, the name Rasputin became more than legend. It became a talisman of fear, a symbol of a power no mortal should possess. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the reach of their eyes and reason, the man who had been poisoned, shot, and drowned seemed to watch, letting the world inch closer to chaos while the secret society floundered, unable to grasp what they sought. The obsession was no longer about survival, nor influence. It had become a compulsion bordering on madness, a mirror to Rasputin's own impossible vitality. The shadow in revolution. Petrograd was a city on fire, though not just from the flames of revolution. Smoke curled from barricades in the streets, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder, while the cries of soldiers and citizens echoed off the walls of shattered buildings. Yet amid the chaos, a figure moved almost unnoticed, slender, long-haired, his coat trailing like a shadow, his eyes glowing faintly even in daylight. Soldiers whispered rumors in hushed tones at checkpoints and in the dimly lit taverns where revolutionaries plotted. The mad monk walks again. Some claimed they had seen him at the front lines, appearing from nowhere to vanish just as quickly, his presence causing skirmishes to falter and bullets to stray. Others swore that even when he was unseen, the sound of his boots, soft and deliberate, followed them through the alleyways, a constant reminder that the man they believed dead had returned. It was not merely fear, it was disorientation. Reports spoke of troops frozen in place, as though mesmerized by some unseen force. Officers found their commands ignored, their men staring into space, murmuring prayers to a figure that existed only at the edge of perception. Some claimed his eyes glimmered like fire in the fog, burning with knowledge, with malice, with something beyond comprehension. Revolutionaries and loyalists alike began to frame him in myth even as they glimpsed him in reality. Rasputin had become more than a man. He had become a symbol, a ghostly presence threading through the upheaval. Each sighting carried the same chilling effect. The world paused, as though acknowledging a being that defied the natural order. And everywhere he went, the question hung over those who survived to speak of it. Is he among the living, or is he something else entirely? The immortal curse. Years later, as whispers of Rasputin's shadow continued to haunt Petrograd, a collection of fragile, leather-bound diaries surfaced from a hidden chest in a provincial estate. They belonged to his daughter, Maria, a woman both devoted and terrified of the man who had been her father. In trembling script, she chronicled the truth that no historian dared speak aloud. Rasputin's life was not mere chance or legend. It was the product of a pact older than the Russian Empire itself. Maria wrote of his time in the Siberian wilderness, where he had wandered not as a man, but as a seeker of something ancient, something buried beneath frozen earth and ice. She spoke of rituals performed in the dead of night, of whispered invocations that drew on forces the mind could scarcely comprehend. And she warned that the power he had gained was not life as the world knew it. It was hunger. He lives, she wrote, but not for us. He consumes, he endures, he watches. To touch him is to touch a force that obeys no law, no morality, no God. His immortality is not blessing. It is a curse that devours everything human. Her diaries described nights when she had seen him drift between shadows like a specter, eyes glowing with an unnatural light, voice carrying a resonance that seemed to echo from 1,000 places at once. He could vanish, only to reappear where least expected. Those closest to him spoke of dreams invaded by his presence, dreams that left them trembling, hearts racing, and minds questioning what was real. Maria's final entries grew frantic. She implored whoever found her words to remember one thing. Rasputin's survival was never accidental. Every wound, every poison, every attempt on his life had merely strengthened the unnatural bond he had formed with an entity older than time. And in the end, she whispered a warning to the world that still trembled at his legend. His life is no gift. His life is the shadow of something eternal, and it hungers still. The shocking finale, the mystic lives on. Decades had passed, yet the name Rasputin refused to fade. Modern investigators, historians, forensic scientists, and a handful of obsessive paranormal researchers descended on the scattered remnants of his legacy, drawn by rumors of his impossible survival. DNA samples taken from purported remains revealed anomalies no lab could explain. Sequences that should have decayed over a century were corrupted, incomplete, almost unnatural. In the remote monasteries of the Ural Mountains, pilgrims whispered of sightings. A tall, long-haired monk, appearing without warning, vanishing without trace, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of otherworldly fire. The locals swore that even animals reacted with fear, that shadows twisted when he passed, and that time itself seemed to hesitate in his presence. Documented accounts poured in from across the continent. Men and women who swore they glimpsed him in crowded streets, in forests, or across silent snowfields. Each sighting carried the same eerie familiarity, the same piercing gaze, the same unsettling calm, the same sense that this was not a man constrained by mortality. Scientific curiosity collided with legend. Labs puzzled over blood that seemed to pulse long after extraction. Photographs showed distortions where he appeared, and everywhere his name was spoken, there was a shiver, a subtle acknowledgement that the world had not seen the last of Grigori Rasputin. The final question remained, echoing through history and into the present. Had he ever truly died? Or was the man the world called Rasputin merely a vessel, a mask worn by something eternal, something that would walk the earth for as long as the world dared to turn? Somewhere, in the shadows of monasteries and city streets alike, the answer lingered, and the immortal mystic watched.